We'll do it live. 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 Okay, so I'm making this video as an open video message regarding the Ukraine war for Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas MacGregor, Kurt Metzger, Jimmy Dore, all people I find interesting, people I find sincere, people who I find are trying to end the Ukraine war. These are the people that I watch that I think these are people that are, and there's other people that I could include too. But here's what I want to tell you is the Zionist thing is almost becoming a distraction. And as somebody who's been in anti-Semitic circles for a very long time, I can tell you that one of the things that the CIA likes to do is to do all the things that, well, let me put it this way. The CIA likes to do horrible crimes. And then when people start to get upset about them, they just say it's the Jews doing it all. And I've seen this happen over and over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean that the Jewish mafia isn't doing stuff. And here's kind of how it works. Because people notice that the Jewish mafia is doing stuff, because Jews kind of stick out. Like once you start noticing Jews, then you're like, you can find them everywhere, right? And so because you notice that there's Jews involved in crime or political movements that you're against, and you start to become very antagonistic towards Jews, then what happens is then the CIA feeds into that, and then they tell you that it's always the Jews. And so every time people start suspecting some big crime, they're like, well, that was just the Jews. And it's literally the CIA doing it. And they're doing it on the internet. They've been doing this as long as I've been on the internet, which is since the early 2000s. Since around 2005, I've noticed the people connected to the CIA doing this. And so now the thing is, I would say nobody knows more about the Jewish mafia than me, frankly. Nobody knows more. I'm going to make sure my volume isn't too high. I think it's too high. It's probably crackly. Let me turn it down. There we go. Nobody knows more about the Jewish mafia than me, except for maybe the Jewish mafia. And nobody knows more about the history of the Republican Party than me. And I don't even know that much. But and nobody knows more about the secret operations during the Revolutionary War in 1773, that started in 1773 in Boston Harbor. And nobody knows more about the secret operations of the Civil War than me. And I don't even know that much. But nobody knows more than me. I'm sure of that, because I've talked to other people and they don't know anything. And so what I'm trying to tell you is, I know what I'm talking about. And I don't know everything, but one of the things I'm really good at is noticing certain anomalies and then looking into them. And once you see them, they're such anomalies that they have to be considered as like, what the hell is this? Okay, what the hell is this? So, so here's what I want to tell you. One of the things we should ask ourselves, okay, because you're not going to believe me anyway. In fact, I'm pretty sure. I think I heard Scott Ritter on with Andrew Napolitano, who's Catholic. Andrew Napolitano is Catholic. I heard Scott Ritter on there, and Scott Ritter said something about the Pope, and Andrew Napolitano, who I like, is saying, what does the Pope have to do? What does the Pope have to do with anything? And Scott Ritter tried to explain to him, well, he provides like this moral premise for these different political activities, right? And Scott's right about that. However, I think there's way more to it than that. And in the last video that I just made about the white lady who had to flee Minnesota because she's being attacked by Somalian pirates under a governor in Minnesota who is a Roman Catholic, Tim Walz, who burned down his cities with BLM and Antifa and used them to cause mayhem, and nothing ever happened to Tim. In fact, he was going to be made the vice president. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Tim Walz burned down Minnesota with Black Lives Matter. It was like literally run by Tim Walz. It was run by Tim Walz with people in Washington, D.C. together with Kamala Harris, who went to a Jesuit school. Okay. And then so I'm saying they burn down cities and they kill people and they fucking terrorize everybody and nothing happens to them. And they're Catholic. Tim Walz is Catholic. And so what I'm saying is, why I'm saying this is the Zionist stuff is real, but it's almost a distraction. It is a distraction. And it's a distraction that the CIA feeds you into because they know that you can see the Jewish mafia and they use that to their advantage so that you never blame them for anything. Okay. Now, what kind of leverage does the Catholic Church have over the government that people would go along with? How is it that Tim Walz can burn down a city and kill people and have like literally armies of savages running around, burning down the city, blocking streets, beating people up, looting buildings, and nothing happens? What kind of leverage does Tim Walz have as a Catholic that he can get away with that? And what kind of leverage does Kamala Harris as? I don't really know what her religion. I just know she went to a Jesuit school, so I consider her kind of a Jesuit operative, an operative of that system, which is a Roman system, and she's an operative. Where do they get their leverage? And I suspect that they get their leverage from a few different places. One is drug money, and I'm talking about pharmaceutical companies. I'm talking about Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. I don't know which one of those exactly, but there's more. And so I'm not saying which one, but I think that just drug companies in general, particularly based in Europe, particularly based in Switzerland and Germany and France and maybe Belgium. I'm not sure exactly where they're based, but that whole region in there, which is that. Okay, so what I'm saying is I believe that those drug companies are the root of the power of the political financial power base of the Roman Catholic Church. It's drug money. It's drug money, and it's distributed, and the drugs are distributed through all the channels across the world. So it's like a global drug trade of all the different types of drugs, all the different pharmaceuticals in the world that are produced. And so the Roman Catholic Church lives off of that. That is their main bread and butter. It's drug money. Just like in Russia, oil, or just like in Saudi Arabia, it's oil, right? In Rome, it's drugs. Drugs are the number one thing that keeps the Roman Catholic Church alive. That's why they have properties all over the world with people that don't work or do anything other than sit in there and play with their beads. All the men in dresses who play with their beads all day, the bead rubbers, they are all financed by drug sales, by pharmaceutical drug money that's operated in conjunction with the Roman Catholic Church. That is their source of income. That is one of their main sources of income. So money's part of it. And then they control the unions also around the entire world, both in North and South America, Central America, and Europe, and probably other places too. So they have an international union network that they use to control the courts, the judiciary, the legislative body, and the executive branch. And that's how they got Lula in. That's how they got Bolsonaro out. But that's what they do everywhere. That's what they do in America. They control the unions in America through the AFL-CIO and other international unions, which we all know have always been very closely connected also to the mafia, the Sicilian mafia. And the Sicilian mafia also runs heroin and cocaine, particularly heroin, because after World War II, or actually during World War II, the reason that the Sicilian mafia came and literally fled Sicily and came to America because of Mussolini. So they had to flee Europe, Italy, Sicily, and come to the U.S. to get away from Mussolini. And when they got here, after the war ended, you see, there was a heroin business that was operating in the Far East since the time of the Sassoon family. And that was shifted from the East and it was shipped into the United States. And so they ran that whole thing since the end of World War II. All the heroin that used to be in the Eastern market now was being shipped through Turkey and through the Sicilian mafia into North America, into the United States of America. So one, you have, as far as like how they fund it. Number one is pharmaceutical drugs. That's the number one way that the Roman Catholic Church funds itself. And second, and also probably through illicit drug use. Now, the other thing that you have to understand is what I believe is through satanic cults. Through satanic cults. And that the Catholic Church has leverage over people throughout Europe and also in America through satanic cults that are involved in distributing drugs and drug addiction and cocaine and heroin, and also without saying too much and getting too into the nitty gritty, I'm talking about the orphanages. Okay. I'm talking about Mother Teresa running orphanages around the world. Mother Teresa running orphanages around the world, and those orphans ending up in the hands of Robert Maxwell, who is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the operative that worked with Jeffrey Epstein. And so there's as far as leverage that they have against American politicians, whether it's just the money or the unions or all the drug money that they're getting. See, you understand all these big media corporations like ABC, CBS, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. These are all bankrolled with drug money. This is 100% bankrolled with drug money, and it's all bankrolled with pharmaceutical drug money. Okay, and so that's what the whole system of the Roman Catholic Church and the media in New York and media in New York and Hollywood and all the unions that are tied into all that with the Roman Catholic Church and the AFL-CIO and the CIA. So that is part of the leverage that they use to get along, right? But the other thing that's happening appears to be what's happening with let's just call it now. It's not just Mother Teresa. She's not even with us anymore. It's not just Jeffrey Epstein, but we know what they were doing, right? We know what they were doing. We know for a fact that Mother Teresa was meeting with Robert Maxwell, who ran blackmail operations using sex operatives. And of course, Mother Teresa runs an orphanage. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to suspect things. So this is what I'm trying to consider as part of the leverage. It's like, what is the leverage that the Pope, who is some ridiculous man who is in Rome wearing a dress and likes to play dress up with a bunch of other guys, and they all dress up and they play with their beads together. They rub their beads. Well, part of it is that you just have all these people in the world that believe in Roman Catholicism. And so they all buy into this. And so they just keep perpetuating it. But it's not just them. It's all the drug money of the pharmaceutical companies, which run the media corporations and are tied into the CIA and are also tied into the illicit drug business and are also tied into the Jeffrey Epstein and the Mother Teresa Global Orphanages Network, because she was 100% providing orphanages or giving access. Mother Teresa, I can say this with 100% fact, is that Mother Teresa provided access to her orphanages to Robert Maxwell, the international blackmail operative. That's a fact. So let's not go deep dive on that because it's so disgusting and reprehensible, and we don't want to Don't want to focus on garbage like that. So here's the thing you have to understand. So everybody's looking at the Zionist thing, right? And they're like, okay, so here's here's what happens on some level. Zelensky's Jewish. He's a Jew, and all these Jews want. All these Jews are running Ukraine, right? And so because they're Jewish, and everyone can see the Jews, and the Pope is just a silly little man in a dress who plays with his beads. See how he seems helpless, and he seems very. So the Pope appears. The Pope has the appearance of being soft and weak and harmless. Harmless. That's the word I'm looking. The Pope seems harmless. Zelensky seems like a madman, right? Zelensky is the madman, and Netanyahu looks like a madman. But the Pope's he's so harmless, and he just loves everybody, and he cares about the vulnerable and the vulnerable, and he just says vulnerable over and over and over again. And the refugees, and they're also vulnerable, and we just want peace. We just want peace. See how he seems harmless, right? See, that doesn't get people's that doesn't get people squaring up to fight, right? When they see the Pope and he sounds like he's got marbles in his mouth, the last one. And he's just mumbling, I love everybody but vulnerable people. When you hear that, it's so harmless and so weak that your alarm bells don't go off. You're not like, oh wow, there's the killer, right? There's the guy I need to square up with and defend myself. No, you don't say that because he's such a weak, vulnerable he's wearing a dress and he's rubbing his beads with some other guys that are all playing dress up. See what I mean? It's not scary. And then you see Netanyahu, and he's like a madman, killer, violent, genocidal maniac. Then you see Zelensky. He's a killer. He wants to kill, right? And so it's really easy to see that and not realize that they're in something with the Pope. And it might be harder to see the connection with Netanyahu, but not if you're in America and you start to notice that all of the main Catholics in the media, like Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Bill O'Reilly, and it just goes on and on and on, and they're all Zionists. And so you look at them and go, Sean Hannity, he's a Zionist. He must be tricked by the Jews. No, he's a Catholic. He's a Roman Catholic carrying out an agenda for the CIA because he gets briefed by the CIA. Sean Hannity is an agent of, he's like not an agent, he's an operative working with the CIA. So is Glenn Beck, who's a Mormon. So is a lot of people. So, there's a lot of them. But I'm just saying, that's a little harder to see the connection. Like, why would the Pope well, why does Sean Hannity talk about it nonstop? Why is everything why is it when you listen to the Sean Hannity show, everything revolves around the Jews and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran? And he's a Catholic. See, you don't see it because Sean Hannity's a Catholic. So when he talks about Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah and the Jews are God's chosen people, you're like, what? He must just be tricked by the Jews. No. But when we look at Ukraine, we see that Russia and Ukraine, and you've got Zelensky meeting with the Pope. And the thing that you have to understand is this, just like in America with Black Lives Matter, burning down cities for the Pope because he didn't like our political choices. Same thing with Russia. It's the same thing with Russia. See, the same thing about burning down Minneapolis, Minnesota, all the cities in Minnesota with BLM, with Tim Walz, who's Catholic, quarterbacking the whole thing, and Kamala Harris, who went to a Jesuit school, quarterbacking the whole thing and bailing people out of prison, and they just get away with it. They can just burn down whole cities. They can just get armies of people out there and get them all agitated through the media, all run by the media that they control. And people think it's the Jews doing all this, when it's really the Roman Catholics. It's a Roman Catholic agenda. And you don't believe me. That's fine. I understand. I didn't believe this either. I didn't believe it either. I was the one telling everyone it was the Jews the whole time. And I'm not saying that Jews aren't doing stuff. I'm just saying okay. So look, when you look at Zelensky, right? And you have to understand, because most of us don't understand the history of the Catholic Church going back into antiquity. But the thing that you have to understand is they had a schism in around 1054, I believe, that separated the East from the West. So every time you hear a politician or someone in the media, they talk about Western civilization or Western values, they mean all of us who are subjects of the Pope, subjects of Rome. That's what they mean by Western values. You think it means white people. I thought it meant white people. Yeah, that's not what it means. It means we're under the Pope. We're the Western values. We're under the Pope. And it's whatever the Pope says. And if you want to know what the Pope's agenda is in your government, it's not Steve Bannon. He's just like, Steve Bannon is just kind of like there to move you back into the fold, right? Because you're leaving the fold, man. You're getting out of the fold. You're going in a new direction. He's there to catch you and be like, hey, buddy, let's get back in that fold, okay? So the real agenda, if you want to say who's carrying out the agenda of the Vatican in Washington, D.C., it's people like Tim Walz. It's Joe Biden. It's Nancy Pelosi. It's Gavin Newsom in California. It's Tim Walz in Minnesota, burning down your cities and killing you and forcing the injections. Anthony Fauci, right? That's the Vatican agenda. And you're like, you got all these Catholics, and they're like, well, I don't support that. Well, you do, because you support Rome. See, you might not like it, but you're supporting it. See, you may not like it, but you support it. You may say you're against it, but you still support it because you support the Vatican and you support the Pope. Like Jack Posobiec is a perfect example. See, Jack Posobiec is there to keep you in the container, and Matt Walsh is there to keep you in the container, and Steve Bannon's there to keep you in the container, and General Flynn is actually there to screw with you with his little QAnon bullshit that he invented with the head of the NSA. It was the head of the NSA and not Steve Bannon, and General Flynn, and what was that guy that was on the Steve Pachenik? He was Jewish. They all ran that QAnon thing together, the QAnon scam that scammed everybody and got everybody to go to the DC and get arrested on January 6th. That was all run by General Flynn. That was run by General Flynn. That's why General Flynn was on the General Flynn the cat. That's why. See, that's how he made up for his whatever. General Flynn did that. He got you to go there and get arrested. You're not going to believe me. That's fine. Don't believe me. So let me tell you let me tell you, we got to stick on the Ukraine thing. The Ukraine agenda looks like a Jewish agenda. There's a lot of Jews involved. There's Kagans and there's the Kaganovich clan, and there's the Zelensky, and there's Klitschko, the boxer. I know that guy. The B'nai B'rith is involved, and the Anti-Defamation League was involved in the overthrow, and you had Mossad agents involved in the original overthrow back in 2012 when they overthrew the government, a violent coup. Yeah, they work with Mossad. But you have to understand is the Roman Catholic, or the Romans established the Hasmonean dynasty in 140 BC. So they established that Jewish lineage in 140 BC as a way to expel the Greeks. And that explains everything that they're still doing today. You see, the Romans were in a war with the Greeks. See, that's East versus West, 140 BC, East versus West. I'm sure Colonel Douglas MacGregor will appreciate this because he likes history. And I think Scott Ritter can appreciate this too. East versus West. Okay. So on one side you've got Rome, on the other side the Greek under Alexander, and now it's the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires. They rule all of Syria and all of Judea, and they rule Egypt and all the way to Chaldea and Persia, right? Well, the Romans want that. So the Romans decided to back a faction of Jews and establish them as the group that will become the leadership in Judea, and that's called the Hasmonean dynasty. And so that's where you get this ridiculous 9-candle menorah, which is not from ancient Israel at all. It's a Roman bullshit. It's a 7-candle menorah. That's the symbol of ancient Israel. And a 9 candle menorah is what I like to call Roman bullshit. It's Roman bullshit, right? And so all the Jews, if you ever want to know which Jews are an invention of the Romans, find the ones celebrating the winter solstice with a 9-candle menorah, and you'll find the Roman bullshit. That's called Ben Shapiro. That's called Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Michael Medved and a whole bunch of other ones. Okay, but they want to do their religion. That's fine. But it's Roman bullshit. I'm just saying it's an invention of Rome. It's Roman bullshit. Okay, that's all I'm saying. It's not it's not ancient. That's not the ancient Israelite symbol. So when you look at Russia, you have to go back to 1054 BC. Why are we at war with Russia in 2025? Well, because of a schism in 1054 BC, and because of a schism in 140 BC. So, I mean, we can all look back to 1054 BC and say, well, that's when the Catholic Church split into two sides, the East and the West. And the East went up into Russia, and the West went into Western Europe and over into North America. See, that's the schism of 1054 BC, and that's why we're at war with Russia. And now it's escalated almost under Biden into a nuclear holocaust where everybody fucking dies. You see? And so here's why I'm telling you this. Because if you want to fix it, you have to look at the demon. See, the demon looks very helpless and very soft and very harmless. I'm a harmless little demon. I'm wearing a dress and I'm playing with my little beads. Me and the boys are just playing with our beads, and we're not going to hurt anyone because we love everyone, and everyone, we love you. Oh, you vulnerable people. Oh, see, that's called a demon. And you don't see that because you're Scott Ritter, and you're a military guy, and I'm sure you can kick my ass. I'm not saying you can't. And you see the guy with the gun, right? You see that guy, and because he's shooting at you, you're going to shoot at him, and you're going to kill him because you're a Marine. I get it. And this little guy over here in the dress playing with his beads, you're going to look at him you're going to point the gun at him and then go, okay, don't worry about that guy. Well, he was running the whole thing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He's running the whole thing. The guy with the dress on with the little beads, the bead rubbers, the guys that rub their beads together, they're running the whole thing. And they've got all kinds of blackmail. They've got all kinds of drug money. And they've got pharmaceutical corporations that produce billions and billions and trillions of dollars worth of drugs that are all paid for by the U.S. government in big corporate socialism scams. Like how in 2020, remember how they locked the whole world down with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the Jesuit Roman Catholic from Georgetown University and the CDC, and then the UN with Tedros and that other Catholic guy that worked together at the World Health Organization. Remember it was Tedros, the Ethiopian Catholic, and then the other guy, the white guy, and they said we got to lock everybody down, and we've got to do contact tracing. We got to find out where everybody is on the earth, and we got to lock them all in their houses and force them, inject them with poison. Remember all that? That was the Catholic Church, bro. That's all run by the Catholic. And so remember how they got all this money that was just given to them for free? Remember all that free money that the government's like, here, have an endless supply of money. Remember that? It all went to the corporations that's run by the Vatican. That's how that works. And so here's the thing. That's why they have to have a little man with a dress playing with his beads. He has to be the one that everybody thinks is at the center of that. And he is at the center of it. That is the center. And they have an agenda, and they know exactly what they're doing. And so what happens is you'll see Zelensky, the coked up maniac, and you'll see Netanyahu, the psychopathic genocidal maniac. And what I'm trying to tell you is the split that happened in 1054. So what happened later and around so you remember how Martin Luther over in Germany, he was the Lutheranism, right? So the Lutherans Well, he wasn't really even the first. You had Tyndale, I believe, in England, who translated the Bible into English. And then you had, so he was like, and I think that was like the 1300s, right? And then in the 1500s, you have Martin Luther, and he's like, yeah, this Pope stuff, they're doing a lot of creepy stuff here. I can't go along with this. So in other words, then they translated the Bible into German, and then you had the King James version comes out. They translate it into the English, and they use or the original Greek version to translate into English instead of the Latin Vulgate, which they may have used a little bit, but they try to go back and get some original sources, which are not the mess around. I know I'm being too technical for you, but let me not be too technical. They just translated the Bible. They went and got original, the original Septuagint, they call it, which is the Greek, and also some later rabbinical sources, and also the Latin, and they compared them all, and they made a version called the King James. But what I'm saying is, see, when all that stuff was going on, and then Freemasonry is being practiced among the monarchies all throughout Western Europe, in Germany, in France, in England, and Scotland, and Wales, and in the Nordic states, and also in Southern Europe, and but not as much. Mostly, it was Northwestern Europe was where Freemasonry was practiced. Germany, Austria, Romania, a little bit. Not so much in the East. A little bit in the East. It was practiced a little bit in Russia at one point too. So what happened was, in France, that was a thing that the monarchy was involved in, right? And then what happened was this led to this thing called the Enlightenment Age, and all these things, century after century, since the Tyndale English translation, and then the Lutheran Bible, all these things led century after century into the monarchies seeking greater and greater autonomy from the Pope. They didn't really want to listen to him anymore. And so what happened was, this is right about the same time that the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church established the Jesuits. The Jesuits were established right about the same time as the Lutheran Protestant Reformation movement, right? And the difference is the Jesuits are being established as an order that has blind obedience to Rome and the Pope, blind obedience to the Pope specifically. So they don't listen to anybody else. Whatever the Pope says, they do. They'll do anything the Pope says without question. And this is unlike the kings, right? The kings were being more and more autonomous, and they were organizing these Masonic networks. So it was like they were setting up a separate thing. Both Catholic and Protestant kings were both doing it. They were both doing it together, and together they were kind of moving into a new direction. And so people see the Protestant movement with Freemason pretty obviously, but what they don't realize is because the kings were also, the Catholic kings were actually becoming just as interested in having their own autonomy and moving further and further and further away from the Pope. Whereas the Pope had established this new order of the Jesuits, who had spread all across Asia and all across India and all across North America and Central. Actually, North America, yeah, they established Maryland and Central America and those islands down there. Now, you got to understand, this is around the time of the sugar business. And so you had what was called the sugar business monopoly, which was run by Jesuits and the Jews that they're in business with. And that's why I'm saying this Jewish Roman syndicate. I call it a syndicate. That's more than one group. That's a coalition. A syndicate is like a coalition of mafias. So they were running this syndicate called the sugar business back in the before the establishment of the United States of America, for instance. And they're the ones that were bringing all the black Africans. They're the ones that are rounding up black Africans and enslaving them and shipping them all over Dominican, Haiti, all these tropical regions, also up into Louisiana, Florida, probably Louisiana, I believe, was the area. Anyway, and so they've got their slaves out there, and they're growing sugarcane because they ran the sugar business. And over in India, they were running the heroin business. So they had a heroin business, which then had been handed off to the British, and then you had the sugar business over here, um, run by the Jesuits and the Jewish mafia working together. The Lyon family was a big Jewish monopoly, but it wasn't just the Jews; it was the Romans, and the Jews were working with them as usual. That's why you have Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh. That's why you have. That's why that's always the way it is. That's why you look at the Supreme Court. It's Jews and Catholics. That's the whole system. Okay. So what happened was the Jesuits were bypassing the kings of Europe all over the world, and basically just, if you think of it as like a mafia war, they were just taking all the money that the kings should have been getting, and they were just shipping it back to Rome because the Pope was sick of the kings. And so this started a war. In 1759, the Catholic kings decided to go to war against the Jesuits, and they forced the Pope to dissolve the order in the summer of 1773. And then in the winter of 1773, there was a Freemason revolt. Why? Because the Jesuits had already infiltrated and taken over the Freemasons as what is called the Illuminati. So they had already taken over the Freemasons, and they got them to revolt. Now, how do I know this? By just looking at the outcome. So a tree is known by its fruits. A tree is known by its fruits. And so what we can see is, you got to understand, the American Revolution lasted only a few years, actually. It only really lasted a few years. And let me just put it this way. So there was a revolt led by the Freemasons in the colonies, right? But it was a Jesuit revolt. And it was a Jesuit revolt because they overthrew the King of England. They fought the Revolutionary War, and they overthrew the King of England. And Ben Franklin is the key figure in this, who's working over in France, and he is the one arranging the loans. Okay, so Ben Franklin is over in France arranging the loans. Of course, France is a Catholic country, and he's arranging the loans with over there in France, and then for all these different states. So it's the different states are having to go into debt to fight the British. Okay. And hundreds of thousands of dollars at that time is what it costs the states. They were like all in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars, like 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, whatever. Right. And so what happened was, so they win, the revolution succeeds. And so once it succeeds, they had their governmental body was based out of Philadelphia and New York. And so what happened was there were certain groups within the new government that they were establishing that wanted to establish a federal government. So now that they had won the American Revolution, now the new thing was, hey guys, we won this American Revolution. Let's form a federal government. And if you join this federal government, then we'll refinance your loans because you're all in debt. You're all in debt from the Revolutionary War. So we'll refinance your loans, which they did, and that's how they got the colony, the new colonies to all agree to support this new federal government, which just happened to be based in Maryland, which was a Jesuit-founded state, in a territory called the District of Columbia, which was donated to the new government by the Roman Catholic Church through a Jesuit bishop named John Carroll. A Jesuit bishop named John Carroll donated the money, not donated the money, but arranged for the property and everything. Well, he also set up Georgetown University. That's the part I forgot to say. You've heard of Georgetown University, where the CIA recruits out of? See, they actually put that there first. So after the American Revolution, you had Georgetown University, and then That was the first chartered school by the U.S. government, and then they set up the District of Columbia basically at Georgetown University. And it's literally, there's Georgetown University, and then there's the White House, and then there's the Pentagon, and there's the Congressional Building. So that's how that went. And the person that's established all that was a Jesuit bishop named John Carroll. And he's a Jesuit bishop establishing a Jesuit school during the time of the supposed Jesuit dissolution of the order that doesn't even exist anymore. Oh, and they just established a school, and they just established a new government in the colonies, in the U.S. colonies. So it doesn't exist, but then they just established a new government, which is going to become the most powerful military in the world and the most powerful banking empire in the world, right? So that's how that happened. And so the Washington District of Columbia is a Jesuit, or the Jesuit thing doesn't really matter. It's a Roman forward operating base founded by Jesuits, but it's a Roman base established by Rome for their new territory. And so one of the things that the Romans were doing at the time was they were promoting this idea of separation of church and state. Why? Because all the governments wanted to separate from Rome and have their own state religion. That's the Church of England. And you had what was called, in Germany, they were establishing a Protestant federation. A Protestant federation, which is why later on, after first they overthrew the King of England. Then they went over to France and got rid of the King of France too, because he was against the Jesuits. Because he was practicing Freemasonry. They got rid of him. Then they had Napoleon, and that went for a while. That reshaped all of Europe. And then you had the rise of the Rothschilds. And around the same time as the rise of the Rothschilds in England, who were backed by the Romans, because it's the Romans and the Jews working together, that's when you had the establishment of the reestablishment of the Jesuits. They were reestablished after that. So you had the American Revolt, and then the French Revolt, and then Napoleon, and the rise of the Rothschilds, and also the reestablishment of the Jesuit order. And then you had the Karl Marx Revolution of 1848, which sought to take out the German, what they call the Holy Roman Empire, which had become a Protestant federation, at the time. And then they used Karl Marx, who went to a Jesuit school, to try to overthrow Germany. And that revolt failed, but they kept trying, and they had World War I, and then they had the Weimar Republic, and that was the success. The Weimar Republic was the success. And then they had the rise of Hitler, and he tried to get rid of all that. And everyone thinks that Hitler was like a Jesuit. No, the Romans hated Hitler. The Roman Catholic Church hated Hitler because the Roman Catholic Church was already operating out of the U.S. They already owned Washington, D.C. What do they need Hitler for? He's causing all these problems. They don't want Hitler. You have to understand, they don't want they didn't want a strong leader. They want weak leaders. That's why they didn't like Donald Trump. They like Joe Biden because he's senile. He doesn't know anything. They want a woman. They want a Joe Biden. They want a black homosexual crackhead like Barack Hussein Obama. That's what they like because they can control him. They don't want a strong guy who makes his own decisions and wants to fight. No, that's that. They didn't want Hitler, and they killed it. They tried to kill Hitler with a 1940 July 1944 plot was called Operation Valkyrie. Right, that was the Jesuits. August Roche, a Jesuit priest, organized the plot to kill Hitler because they wanted to get rid of Hitler. They never see people think it was the Catholics versus the U.S. No, it wasn't. It was Hitler thinking that he was gonna save Germany from this horrible situation, and he didn't. So anyway, and then they just put in more of the same after they got rid of him. They just put more of the same Roman democratic capitalist, this whole model that we're under. This whole model we're under in the European Union and in UK and in America, that's always been since all these Republican revolts. Let me explain this to you again. They wanted to get rid of the kings. So they got rid of the kings with republicanism. Remember that king that they had in Russia called the Tsar? Well, they got rid of him. And so here's the thing you have to understand. What Christians want to go to Russia? What Christians want to go to Russia and kill a bunch of Christians and kill a bunch of Christian priests and burn down a bunch of Christian churches? They don't. But that's why they got Jews to do it out of Ukraine. That's why they got Trotsky to do it. See, Trotsky was a Ukrainian Jew, and he was happy to do that. He wanted to do that. Who else likes to do that? Muslims, like Al-Qaeda. They like to do that all over the place. They do that in Syria. They do that in Iraq. They do it everywhere. They love that. And so that's how it helps the Pope. That's why the Syria thing, what they did in Syria is the Pope's on board. That's why it's called ISIS, because it's Catholic. Because it's Catholic. Anyway. So yeah. So what I was saying is, you're not going to get Christians to invade Russia and kill priests and burn down Christian churches, but you can get Trotsky to do that because he's Jewish. He wants to do that. And the Muslims want to do it too. That's why you have Turkey. That's why it's all Muslim now. That's why they killed the Armenians. They killed off the Armenians, and they took out they killed the Armenians, and now it's Muslim. Because that did the job that the Pope wanted. And that's why they overthrew the Tsar, and they put in communism, Jewish communism in 1917, because that's what the Pope wanted, because it's good for the Pope, because he's at war with the East. And he's also at war with the West. If you don't go along with what he says, he'll burn down your city with Black Lives Matter. That's what Black Lives Matter is for. If you go against the Pope, you get your house firebombed, you get killed, you get dragged in the street and beaten up or shot, or have your stores looted and have your whole city burned down. Because that's Roman Catholicism. That helps the Pope. And that's what the Pope said he was doing. He said, go out and riot. He said that. He said that during the George Floyd riots. George Floyd is a patron saint of the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church. And so why I'm telling you that is because that's what they're trying to do to Russia. That's what the whole Zelensky government's for. It's the Roman Catholic Church. All right. Well, that's it, man. I don't have anything else to say. I hope that helps you.